Buster Keaton, everybody. Hi everyone, I'm Andy Moore, and this is Andy's Treasure Trove, where I share with you some of my favorite people, places, and ideas in the worlds of culture, art, and fun. In this episode of Andy's Treasure Trove, you'll hear a very interesting conversation I had with Rusty Frank, the author of a book called Tap, The Greatest Tap Dance Stars and Their Stories, 1900 to 1955. Rusty interviewed over 30 tap dance legends for this book, including Shirley Temple, Ruby Keeler, Fayard Nicholas of the Nicholas Brothers, Gene Nelson, Donald O'Connor, Ann Miller, and many, many others. It's a deep dive into pop culture of the first half of the 20th century and a close-up view into a cherished American dance form that swept the globe and is still popular worldwide. In addition to being a writer, dance historian, and preservationist, Rusty is an accomplished professional dancer specializing in tap and the Lindy Hop. She teaches dance online and at her school called Lindy By the Sea. She produces dance shows, and she has a dance club called Rusty's Rhythm Club in Los Angeles. We began this interview after a walk through El Segundo in Los Angeles, where Rusty lives. I also want to say something about El Segundo, because this is being recorded in a place that, even though I was born and raised in Los Angeles, I've never been to El Segundo. And I find that it's a charming corner of the city that you discovered well before I did. Rusty Frank?
Yes, yeah, I did. I had some friends who lived here, and they recommended that it might be a nice place for me to live. That it's they knew I like small town living, but I needed to live in LA, so it was just a perfect option for me, because it really is small town living here. They call it the town that time forgot. It's also known as Mayberry by the Sea. It's adorable, and it's right by the ocean. So
I was going to say, it's like a little village by the sea.
It has that total village, small town feel. We have our own fire department, our own police force, and our own school system. And there's only 16,000 people who live here, which for LA is quite small. So, but we have all the amenities of LA. So if you like theater, hiking, it's all right here in Los Angeles County.
And right before we arrived in El Segundo, we drove along the coast between the airport and the ocean. And I thought we would see planes taking off. But what we saw were old streets that must have led to old houses that have been all chain-linked, fenced off, because that's where the planes go over. And I guess
when they built LAX, they bought out all those homes that were there in Playa del Rey. So they bought everybody had to move, because that's where the planes were going to be going over. Yeah. So that it is a really kind of interesting, evocative, haunting, because you see the streets, they're all cracked and grass going through it, and there's these old palm trees, and I always wish they could open it up as a parkland, but I think just for security they need to keep it cordoned off. But it's a nice little wildlife refuge. There's always hawks there, and there's burrowing owls, and the El Segundo blue butterfly. Yeah.
Well, are you allowed, is there a way in there, or you can only look at it from the outside?
There's no way in. Yeah, there's no way in. No, they have it sealed off.
That's what makes it all the more appealing to want to explore.
Yeah. It's quite nice to see an open space with no people on it. That's nice. When I drive by and you see that open land, it's nice. Yeah.
Well, El Segundo's very pleasant and a nice discovery. You're a rediscovery. You and I met something like 45 years ago, briefly, and you might not even remember me, because I was with a friend who was taking a tap dance class from you at UC Santa Cruz, and I just went along, and not only did I meet you there, but I met someone who ended up being very important in my life, who was another one of your students, Tom Lehrer.
That's right.
And did you know Tom before that class?
I knew Tom, well, I had been a big fan of Tom's. Growing up, our family had his records, and we knew them all by heart. And he was just part of our home life, those comedy records. And then when I went to Santa Cruz, I'd heard through the grapevine that he was there and had wanted to meet him. And it all became possible because I was at the same college he was at. But really what happened was there was a tap class that was being taught that he and some other friends of mine were in. And so I went over, even though I didn't need a beginner class at that point. I was, not that I was sensational, but I didn't need a beginner class anymore. I'd been tap dancing since I was 6. and had an extraordinary teacher. But I thought, yeah, I'll go over and take a look. Well, when I went over, the teacher didn't show up that day. So somebody kind of poked me in the ribs and said, well, why don't you teach the class? And so for that one day I taught it and then I think it might have been Tom and a couple other people said, would you consider doing a class at Cowell? Because the UC Santa Cruz was divided up in colleges, and the college where this tap class was all the way over on the other side of the campus, and it was easily a half-hour walk over there, if not further. And so I thought, oh, that'll be fun. And so it was a nice little, just a small class with Tom and a few other people, and we just had a good time. Mm-hmm. It was really enjoyable. And I'm a big believer in small is beautiful, so I enjoyed a small class versus that other one. I seem to remember just this room full of people, like 100 people or something, which was not, if you've ever been in a room with tap dancers, 4 is enough. For me, clattering away, practicing their shuffleball change. Yeah. So yeah, that was really fun. And then Tom and I found that we were real kindred spirits, that we just loved so much in common. His first big love is the Broadway musicals, and mine was Hollywood musicals. And it makes a lot of sense because he was raised on the East Coast and I was raised right here in Hollywood. In the Hollywood area. And so we complemented each other really well. And so we always had a lot to talk about, and we both loved tap dancing, and so it was always very jolly and fun. Yeah.
Who was the teacher whose class you pirated away to the other side of campus?
I have no idea whose class that was. I don't know if I ever even met them. I don't know if it was a he, a she, or what, because the day I went over, I think I went once or twice. I don't remember anything. And thankfully I didn't pirate. I think there were just 3 students from Cowell who I was already friends with that we ended up doing that class there. Yeah.
I didn't mean to cast aspersions.
We were just so grateful not to have to go all the way across campus. But yeah, that was so much fun. And Tom also was part of this Cowell College, we called it the round table, and it was just this one round table in the dining room where several professors and just a handful of students, not even a handful, maybe 2 or 3 of us, got to sit, and that was just amazing. Every day at lunch it was Tom and Mary Holmes and Charles Selberg. So Mary Holmes was the art history teacher, Charles Selberg was the fencing master, and so to be there and just to get to soak that in with these brilliant minds, and they were real diverse, one from another, but they all just loved being together. And if I could go back in time, I'd love to go back to that table for lunch.
Did you call it the something round table?
Round table.
Just
we did.
Round table.
Yeah, because there was the Dorothy Parker round table at the Algonquin, like Dorothy Parker and many, many others at the Algonquin. So I think now I even wonder if I just called it that or if other people called it that too. I'll have to ask somebody, but that's what we called it. It was a round table. And all the other tables in the dining room were rectangular.
Well, you took advantage of something in college that some students don't, which is making friends with the professors.
Isn't that interesting? And I want to say that they are still my friends. Of all my college friends, I would say that it's equal number students and professors.
As a young child, 9 or 10, I took a few weeks of tap classes. So I had very little experience in tap, but I really enjoy watching it. And I was always and still am a big fan of Shirley Temple, and I understand she was inspirational to you.
I think so many children, she's the gateway drug for many things, not just tap dancing, but also old movies, the old black and white movies, musicals, fashion, cars, all that whole Art Deco era, because it's one of the few things that little kids can see and relate to right away because it's another child. And those movies were on regularly when I was a kid, so I watched them religiously. And so she was I was 6 when I started watching her movies, and I didn't know you could still do that. I didn't know you could still tap dance. Like, was it a thing you did? Or I was just watching these movies. And one day I was out front of our house, and my next door neighbor, Cindy Catlin, came home and from her tap class and showed me a shuffle. And I did the shuffle. She showed me how to do it. I did it. And I ran into the house and I said, Mom, I want to take tap class. Because now I understood that you could actually go take classes. And so she signed me up, and there you go. So it was fantastic. And I started with a little mom and pop school where I learned tap, ballet, and tumbling. They did 15 minutes of each. And I only wanted to do the tap. So she was able eventually to find another place for me to go that was just a tap lesson with John Zerby, who had been a vaudevillian and was a really, really lovely, wonderful, beloved teacher here in the San Fernando Valley. And all the tap dancers from that era knew his name. And then his wife, Katie Zerby, he was in his 50s, and his wife was a lot younger. And they were just I can't even tell you, people could not be lovelier than they were. They're so, it was a great environment for, imagine this kid who at that time loved old movies and in the midst of the hippie era and rock and roll. It was a little bit of a jolly misfit. So this was such a nice place to go to once a week for classes. And then when I was a teenager, we found another school that was closer to my house, and the teacher was Louis Dupron, who is a legend in the world of tap. He was out here in Hollywood in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and first had a small career on film as a dancer, and then became a choreographer. And his most notable contribution, I would say, is Donald O'Connor, because he became Donald O'Connor's, I guess you would say, teacher and choreographer, everything for decades. And so he had a big successful career in Hollywood for all the way through television, variety shows and things. And he also had two schools, and one was right near where I lived. So it was literally my mom either having a friend say or looking in the phone book, but there I was suddenly at this, and me not having a clue, just knew this guy was great. And then I started looking at the pictures on the wall. Ginger Rogers, "Dear Louie, thanks for everything, you're the greatest," all these. And I wait a second, who is this guy? Pre-internet, trying to figure it all out. Yeah.
Well, when you mentioned Donald O'Connor, it seems to me that I read, or maybe I listened to one of your gatherings online, and we were talking about how tap dancers didn't or hardly ever wore tap shoes when they were on film performing. The tap sounds were dubbed in later, either by them or by other people. And isn't it true that this man you're talking about dubbed in some of Donald O'Connor's taps?
You have a great memory. Yeah, we did talk about that. And it is true. Now, first, people might be interested in why the tap sounds were put in afterwards, because sometimes when you say they were dubbed, people have an adverse reaction that, oh, they were dubbed, why were they dubbed? Well, it just had to happen for the process of filmmaking, because if you just visualize a dance number, you'll see that there's close-ups, there's far away shots, so you can't equalize the sound in that setting to get it just right. So they discovered that the three methods of recording taps, one was pre-recording them, and then the dancer had to match them on set, which everybody agreed very quickly was just impossible to do. The next one was live, which meant you could only really have one spot, so the boom was just held and there could just be one camera shot. Then the third one was putting him in after, and that worked out the best for everybody concerned. It was hard work to do it, but they did it. So the dancer would be filmed to a playback of the orchestra playing back, and they would tap, so they didn't have to wear tap shoes, which was really nice, because anybody who's ever slipped on a pair of tap shoes knows that's the imperative word, slip. It's so easy to slip in tap shoes, and especially they had those shiny floors in the movies, those beautiful polished up floors, so it's nice to be slip and slide. So oh, I remember how fun those were. And so they would dub them in later, and in Donald O'Connor's case, I'm sure he could have done it, but he was so busy. He was making one film after another in those days. So this is the days we're talking about is pre-Singing in the Rain. This would be the 40s when he was in the Jive and Jackson Jills and those teenage movies and some other things. So it was just, he'd already be working on another movie by the time it came to lay down those taps. So Louis would do it. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure, as you know, much the same is done with movie dialogue. Mm-hmm. Location, especially location shooting, there's traffic noise and airplanes going over, yeah. And it's just, and you have to hide the microphone and make sure it's off screen and everything. So they dub in a whole lot of dialogue and sound effects
Yeah.
later. So it's a really constructed thing versus a simple recorded performance.
Right. It's hard. It was hard work. One of my friends did some dubbing for she actually dubbed for Ginger Rogers once, which was interesting because when they asked her to dub it, she said, "I've already seen the movie. It's already out. What do you need me for?" And they said, "Well, this is the German language version, and there's one scene where she's talking and tapping at the same time. If anybody's seen the major and the minor, it's a scene in that one where there is no music. There wasn't. It's just her talking and tapping. So now they're putting in the German." And so Miriam had to match that. And she said it was really tricky because they'd play the film for you on a screen. You'd have a headset on, and then there'd be a wood floor, and they'd give you a click track, just a dink, 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 and then they'd play a certain number of bars, maybe 10 seconds or 20 seconds, and you would match the taps, and then they would do the same thing for the next part, next part, next part. Yeah, she said it was hard. She even dubbed this Miriam Nelson, if I didn't say so already, and she even dubbed Jerry Lewis. And she said that was the hardest one because he just jumped around.
Let's get back to Shirley Temple.
Sure.
She was an inspiration to you. She was an inspiration to me. She was beloved by people the world over. Of course, later she got out of show business and went on to many other activities. Yeah. Ambassador to Ghana, I think. But at one point, and this is a good lead into your book, you'd been teaching tap and working with various other tap professionals, and at some point, how did you get the idea of writing a book about the history of tap?
Oh, right. Okay, that's a good question because I'm not a writer, so why did I write a book? It was the scariest thing I've ever done, I think. What happened was the teacher I was talking about a moment ago, Louis Dupron, got ill and died. And I was driving from LA to San Francisco, and this thought was just overwhelming me that his whole life story was just going to disappear now because he was a behind the scenes guy. He wasn't in the front on camera much. And I thought, gosh, all that interesting life, that great legacy is going to be gone. And then I started realizing this was going to happen with many, many, many of these tap artists whom I had now come to know through some of the tap festivals, who had never had big screen careers. They were on Broadway or in nightclubs, that type of thing. And I thought, gosh, somebody should really write their stories. And that's that same thing that happens when you say somebody should do. No, gonna be me. So I tried to find a collaborator at first because I'm definitely not a writer. I didn't consider myself one at that point. And I finally realized I knew how I wanted to do it. I had the vision. I was just gonna proceed. And I got really lucky because I had some friends in San Francisco who had really good connections, like Gerald Nachman, who wrote for the entertainment section of the San Francisco Chronicle. He was a friend of mine, and he gave me the phone number of his agent, his literary agent, and so I put together a book proposal and sent it to her, and she ended up liking it and getting a contract for me with a publisher. And so I was just super lucky on that, 'cause that's not an easy thing to do, to get a publisher for a tap dance book. Yeah. And so, but my vision was to interview these people who had had their careers in the first half of the 20th century. That's what I wanted to focus on, because that's the era I'm really intrigued by, because that's all of that real early days of tap up to the golden era of tap. And I thought I would enjoy that. I've always loved hearing the stories from those people, and I knew a couple, but not many. So my idea was to interview them one by one, and then edit out my questions. So it's just like you're sitting there listening to them tell you your story, which is the best. It's so great. And then I would, for each chapter, I would put in a contextual preface. So if they talked about vaudeville, then I would say what vaudeville was so the reader could follow along their stories. And it just came out great. It was exactly what I wanted. I'm really pleased I did it. It was 3 years of my life, and I got to meet so many wonderful people. And what's great is a lot of them became friends, like the Nicholas brothers and Gene Nelson, Dorothy Toy and Paul Wing. They became real bona fide friends that hang out, let's go for a meal, let's just spend time together. Friends, let's tap dance.
So on the strength of the fact that you had a book deal and that you knew about tap But you weren't a big name. You probably had to introduce yourself. Was there anyone who blew you off or?
Yeah. The interesting thing was that I was completely unknown. Nobody knew who I was. And why would they? I was just a tap dancer. I was a performer in San Francisco, but didn't have any international or national notoriety. So it was I was very calculating. So I thought, let me get a couple really big names interviews first. And so I got Fayard Nicholas of the Nicholas brothers and Leonard Reed, who was out here in California. He lived to be 97 and a half. He was the most amazing guy and had an absolute complete memory of his life. He was, what did they call that one? Absolute recall? Like he could remember, I think it's called absolute recall. So anyway, I was able to interview Fayard Nicholas and Leonard Reed. Leonard Reed was one of the creators of the Shim Sham in 1927 with his then dance partner, Willie Bryant. So these two, I knew these two, if I could get these two, they would be. And what I had to do is I actually had to practice saying the sentence, "Hi, my name is Rusty Frank, and I'm writing a book on the history of tap, and I already have Leonard Reed and Fayard Nicholas in it, and I'd like to include you." And I practiced saying that, because what I really had to practice saying was, "I'm writing a book." I had to practice that because, again, I know I've said it twice, and I'll say it the third time. I didn't consider myself a writer. I wasn't a writer. Writing came very hard to me, and so it was a scary, that idea of putting myself forth that way, but I just practiced that sentence. And then because I had those two good chapters, that's how I got the book deal. And then because I had those two people, those two artists, it opened the door, and I just kept going for, it sounds very calculating, which is the word I use, but I feel that if you want to get something done, you've got to be pragmatic about it. So I thought, well, I've got to get some big names, and then I can get everybody I want. Because first of all, the publisher is going to want to have big names. Of course, they would want that. They would want the Ann Miller and Shirley Temple and Jean Nelson. They want those big names. But then that will give me the opportunity to get some of the names that I wanted in there, like Toy and Wing, and the ones that the mainstream person wouldn't have heard of, but had these incredible careers that they would love to read about. So that's how it happened. Now, Shirley Temple was really hard to get, and I just knew I had to get her, but she was really difficult to get because for her, that period of her life was over. She didn't want to talk about it anymore. And she was just on her way to become ambassador to Czechoslovakia, then Czechoslovakia. And so I don't want to go into the whole story, but I got this little tiny window. And it's a funny thing, too, because when she called me and said, I can do the interview right now for, what was it, like 15 minutes or a half, whatever it was, I had 103 fever with the flu. And I said, I had the wherewithal to say, may I call you back so I can set up my recording equipment? And guess who I called at that point? I called up Tom Lehrer and said, Tom, Shirley Temple just called me and said she'll do the interview right now. And although I've been a fan of her my whole life, I have 103 fever and I just took some codeine and I can't even think of any question. And so he gave me a whole list of questions to ask her. It was so amazing that not amazing. It was just so ironic that I finally get to interview and I'm hopped up on coding, with I can't even, just this big blurry. I've never gone back and listened to that interview. It'd really be interesting to do it just to see if I sound anywhere going. But 103 fever that I had the wherewithal to ask to call her back and then to call Tom. One of the things she really focused on was working with Bill Robinson, which was really great. That was great to hear about that and because that was a unique relationship, and more so considering the time, the period that we're talking about. So, and they were so close, really, really close friends. They made 4 movies together. And if the listener doesn't know why it's so important, is that these were from, I think, 1935 to 1938. I think I've got maybe earlier, but 35 to 38. And he was black and she's white, and they held hands in these movies. And I know there was some stigma to it that he was always playing a servant role. And yet, looking at it now, we just see how important that was for people to see these two together in a loving friendship. and that most often in those movies he was watching out for her, and you could just really read that their friendship. So she talked about that. It was really nice.
And I assume that even though dancers in movies are supposed to be smiling and acting like they're having a ball, I think she was.
Oh yeah, they definitely had a great time together, and she, yeah, I can say with certainty that's how she felt when she danced with him.
Tell me some other things about the conversation, about either personality or approach or point of view, or from your point of view, trying to get the information you wanted.
It was really interesting because I had always related to her as this musical child star, and now I am talking with an adult who, and she was really a force to be reckoned with. She was very. There was something about her that was just very direct. It was certainly not the person you thought you were going to be talking to. She had become an adult person who was in the diplomatic corps. So you're not talking, let's talk about the old days and tap dancing. No, this was not really high on her agenda. And I was just super lucky that she agreed to do the interview. So, but I remember that. I remember kind of having to hold back and not be my normal enthusiastic gushing self.
I just had lunch with you at a restaurant, and you are gushing happiness and positivity and enthusiasm and complimenting people, and you're just a ray of sunshine. Oh. So to tamp that down for Shirley Temple is kind of funny.
I know. Yeah, it was a little bit. Yeah, that is so true. And every now and then you have to do that in life. You have to sort of suppress who you naturally would be just to accommodate the person and not freak them out, I guess. And again, being very sick and being on coding, that certainly. But it was. I'm not quite sure how to put it in words, but it was, of course, all those years being such a super fan, it was different than I expected it. But I'm really, it was interesting, and it was short and sweet because she was packing, and she was packing to go to Czechoslovakia. Like that week, so she didn't have time for this, and so I was lucky that it happened.
I mentioned to you earlier that I tried to get an interview with her when I started my podcast in 2008, but by that time she was obviously quite older, and I read that she didn't really answer correspondence because she learned that people would just sell her signature on eBay, and it wasn't really as genuine a transaction as she wanted. Yeah. But I'm so glad that you got to her. This might be a good time to tell us what the title of your book is and who the publisher was.
And the good news is it's still in print. So it's been in print since 1990. That's 31 years. And that's pretty terrific. They call it an evergreen, and I hope it continues to be an evergreen because that means that there's still tap dancers and people who are interested in the history of tap and all those people. So the book is called Tap, all capital letters with an exclamation point. Tap, the greatest tap dance stars and their stories, 1900 to 1955. And the publisher originally was William Morrow, and now it is Da Capo Press, DACAPO, Da Capo. That was my goal, was that these people would be remembered. So if it's not in print, then that defeats the goal that I had. So it's still in print. And what's really nice is that there was a first edition, which was a hardcover, and it's beautiful. And then there's a second edition, which is softcover. And in the softcover edition, I was able to include the chapter of Toy and Wing. And to me, that was really a lucky thing to have happen because I didn't know about them when I started the book. So when I did the hardcover edition, I found out about them too late. They are from San Francisco. Well, I shouldn't say they're from San Francisco. Paul Wing was from San Francisco. Dorothy Toy was from LA, and they teamed up, and they were known as Toy and Wing, the Chinese Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers during the 1930s and 40s. And she was actually Japanese American. He was Chinese American. And they teamed up, and they were just a fantastic team. They tap danced, they did ballroom, and their story is absolutely fascinating because they were trying to perform in a white world that didn't understand that there could be such a thing as Chinese not coming out in Chinese robes, you know. But they loved tap dancing and tapped to their dying days. And she lived to be, I think, 101. I know she made it past her 100th birthday. And Paul Wing taught me how to bow, because he got mad at me because he would come watch me perform, or we'd be in the same show, and I would bow once and run off stage. Just a quick bow and run off stage. He says, no, no, no. He said, Rusty, you must come to the center and bow. And then you walk to one side and you bow again. And then you walk to the other side of the stage and you bow again. And then you come back to the center and then you can leave. And so doing that was so terrifying for me that I used to say his name, Paul Wing, Paul Wing, Paul Wing, Paul Wing, and then run off stage. But I understood he was saying, that the audience, you've just performed for them. They want to thank you. So they want to express themselves at this point. You have to let them. So.
Well, and it's also nice for you to get a little more time accepting that approval.
Yeah, you see my cheeks blushing at that point. But yeah, their story was just so great, how they teamed up and the trials and tribulations they had as Asian American performers, and how they had to flee California during World War II because of, even though she was going by Dorothy Toy, she went by a Chinese name, they still got ratted out that she was Japanese American, and she would have been sent to an internment camp during World War II. So they had to flee California, and then pretty much they had to stop performing because people at that point were so racist against any Asian face, even though we were allies with China and stuff. So it was just impossible. And he got drafted and was overseas in Europe fighting, and so yeah, tough story. But then they came back and had a big career, and she's very well known in the Bay Area, teaching. She was until really the end of her life, teaching young people from the Chinese American community how to tap dance. She wanted them to know how to dance. She was so great. I love them so much.
So when the first edition of the book was done, I assume the publisher or you sent copies to everyone you had interviewed. Did you get any interesting feedback?
Well, my favorite one was from Frances Neely, who had been a chorus girl. And yes, I did. I sent them all a thank you letter, and I sent them each a copy of the hardcover edition. And she wrote me this note on a card that says, "Thank you for validating my life." And that was it for me. I was so happy. I still cry when I think of that note. It was so beautiful. In being a chorus girl, that was not the top, right? She was not the star. And so there was always sort of kind of this stigma. Not only was she a tap dancer, but she was in the chorus. So never made it. And tap, for a while, had gone really out of fashion. In the 60s and 70s, it was just not hip to tell anybody you did it. And so she always loved it, and she couldn't understand why people looked down on it. And there was just a lot to her story. She was very light-skinned, African-American. She was from the Bay Area, but she went to New York and found it was like, where do you fit in if you're light-skinned, dark-skinned, medium-skinned, all this, trying to get a job. And she told me this story once. She was sunbathing and somebody said, "You better get out of there, you'll turn too dark for the job you have right now." Sometimes people don't think we've made progress. Folks, we've made progress. I'll tell you that the things I learned from interviewing all these people, we've still got a long way to go, but we've made a lot of progress. Yeah, and I think Leonard Reed was really happy. He was the one, again, who, with his partner Willie Bryant, created the Shim Sham, which is called the national anthem of tap. And I found out later, I didn't really know this, but I found out later that he was really grateful. He felt that I had put the spotlight on him, that he had created it, because it had gone out of knowledge that he had created the dance. And so he was really grateful that I had done that, and was really proud to be in the book. I think everybody in the book liked the company they were keeping in that book. It was a nice spectrum of artists. I tried to cover the gamut of styles of tap and the types of people who were doing it. So I had Peg Leg Bates. He was a one leg and one peg, and he had a resort in the Catskills for blacks because there was segregation and they couldn't go to the other Catskill resorts. So like the Jews couldn't, so the Jews had their own, and the black. So he was just an entrepreneur and really interesting guy, as in addition to being a fantastic tap dancer. So all these tap dancers who roller skated and skipped rope and did acrobatic tap dancing, and then men, women, black, white, Asian, kids, grown-ups. I just tried to get everything. I tried to really cover, and where they performed: vaudeville, Broadway, nightclubs, movies. So you learn everything about kind of this cultural American art form by reading their stories.
Tap really is an American art form.
I believe it is. Yes. I believe that it's so American because it's the meeting and meshing of all these different cultural dances. So you have the black music and dance that came from Africa, and then you have the Irish and Scottish that came from those countries, and they all met and saw each other's dances, and they were living near each other in New York in the Five Points district, and stealing steps and creating new steps. I was saying it's kind of like you've got this experiment going with the vial, and you pour all these different liquids in, and it blows up into this new art form called tap dancing. So I've always loved that about it. I've always loved that it's been goes across all these different backgrounds of people. I think it's a beautiful thing, and I've always found it very kind of ahead of the game in America as far as integration. And I guess integration might not be the right word, but that tap dancers always looked at another person as just a person, and do you like tap or not? Do you want to tap dance or not? Not like the color of your skin or your religion or anything. And they all talked about that over and over again. Yeah.
Did you hear back from Shirley?
No, I never did. No, I never heard back from her. I don't know. For the most part, I think people have been very happy with the book. Everybody's who uses it now for their classes, teachers, and students are really grateful to have the stories from the people themselves. They're getting to hear it through the voice of the dancer. One of the great things about doing the interviews with the people in my book, as I mentioned, was I got to know them, but I also got to tap dance with many of them in shows. I produced a show in the Bay Area called Jazz Tap, and I got to hire the Nicholas brothers, which was, it's still, I can't believe it. Sometimes I say that out loud and think, I hired the Nicholas brothers. They were friends, and so I got this show, and I was able to book them, and so that meant I got to perform on stage with them every night, doing the good old shim sham at the end, and I used to stand right behind them, in between them, because I wanted to try to get whatever I could from their style. Yeah, so that was great. Getting to work with the Nicholas brothers was just gorgeous. And then I ended up tap dancing a lot with Gene Nelson. And Gene Nelson, if you've seen the movie Oklahoma, he played Will Parker. So he was the one who sang that song, "Everything's Up to Date in Kansas City," and then does the big tap number with the Cowboys. He was a great tap dancer who came in just at the tail end of the movie musical. So although his numbers are sensational in these movies, they're kind of buried in B movies. But if you go onto YouTube and just type in Gene Nelson dancer, you'll have a happy rabbit hole of hours of entertainment. So I ended up tap dancing with him for, like a year, I think. And he just wanted to start working out again and create stuff. So it was just, to get to tap with these people. I remember one day we were in the studio tapping, and I said, "Excuse me for a minute." And I left the room, and I had this thing, I wanted to run out to the street and scream, "I'm tap dancing with Gene Nelson, everybody." It just was boggling to me. Yeah. And this is one of my favorite memories of the book, actually. You mentioned before that none of these people knew who I was. How did I get in their doors? And I said that I told the publisher, to get the publisher, I said a certain thing. But to them, I said, "My name is Rusty Frank. I'm writing a book on the history of tap, and I'm a student of Louis Dupron's." And then I was saying I also have Fayard Nicholas, and as I started adding more people, to lure them in to be in with this prestigious group. But that Louis Dupron thing that was a door opener for a lot of them. They all knew who he was. He was a dancer's dancer. And so when I interviewed Gene Nelson, And it was a really good interview, just real solid. He was very forthcoming, really nice guy. And at the end of the interview, I said, would you mind? I have a videotape here. Notice I said videotape. This was a while ago. So it would have been around 88. So I said, of me and my 2 dance partners. And one of my dance partners is dying now of AIDS. And I know it would mean a lot to him because you are his hero. You are his idol. If I could show you this clip of us so you could see him, and I could then tell him that you got to see him. And so I showed him as just one number of us. It was a real good number from a TV show we were on in San Francisco. And it was real good, and I could see he was really enjoying it and everything. And I was like, yes, I can go back and tell Rodney that he... But at the end of the number, he turns to me and he said, why didn't you tell me you could tap dance? You know, first of all, I had told him, but what I understood what that meant. And then he wrote, and I brought a book around with me and it said something, where were you when I needed you? It was, that was a great, great encounter. And then that's when he told me he was tapping again and would I like to come in and join him. And he had some other people he was tapping with. So it was just a couple of us. Anyway, that was a great story. Why didn't you tell me you could tap dance? And just the way he said it, I was like, oh, yeah. And he gave me some of the best advice that I could ever give to anybody else. And that is onward and upward and don't look back. I think I've had a very nice, steady career that never was meteor. What's that word?
Mediocre?
No, not mediocre.
Meteoric.
Meteoric. Neither mediocre or meteoric has been everything has just been nice and steady. I've worked real hard. I was with the San Francisco Tap Troupe. I performed then with some dancers I really, really wanted to work with in San Francisco, Wayne Doba and Rodney Price. We became a trio called 6 Feet, a tap trio. And then Patty Mahar and Walter Freeman. So I had partners, and I loved that. And then at that point, because that was the early 80s, and then I started thinking, God, I'd love to do a musical. And there were lots of musical productions going on in San Francisco at the time, the San Francisco Bay Area. So I ended up doing a bunch of book musicals in which I always played the exact same character, which is the wisecracking best friend of the leading lady. And I kept wondering why I was getting cast that way. And I would ask my friends, why I'm always getting the same character? You know, all the funny lines. And they go, well, Rusty, it's pretty much you, the wisecracking. Yeah, so let's see if I can remember them. Babes in Arms, Dames at Sea, 42nd Street, Mac and Mabel. And then with the San Francisco Tap Troupe, we did 2 original musicals, Sneak Preview and 5, 6, 7, 8. And then I moved, so I did all those shows, and they were the most professional those got as far as the book musicals was Civic Light Opera, but otherwise they were more community theater at that time. Oh, and then here I did Stepping Out in Los Angeles. I did a small production of that, and I have to say I just absolutely love doing musicals, and it's sort of my dream is to go back and do a musical where I'm one of the townspeople in The Music Man. Just be in the background swaying from side to side. I would love to do that. But then I have to say I never really taught tap as a business because it was just too hard to make a living doing it. There's not enough people who take class and you have to survive. So I did never do that. But I got hired to teach tap dancing at a swing dance event, and that's where I discovered swing dancing, specifically the Lindy Hop. And I ended up partnering up with a British Lindy Hopper named Simon Selman, and I moved to England for 2 years. And he and I did a cross trade where I taught him tap and he taught me Lindy Hop. And I ended up doing a 51-city tour of Europe with him with a Glenn Miller orchestra, where we were the featured dance act on stage. And it was fabulous to dance in front of that big band playing that great book of music. It was fantastic. And he had a school and a club, and a swing dance school and a swing dance club. And I looked at that and I thought, gee, I don't want to live in England anymore. It's too gloomy here. And I miss my sunny California. So I came back home and I thought, I'd really like to do that. That I like that business model. And I saw that you could actually make a living doing swing dancing. More people take it and do it, and it's more social. So I came back here and I was able to actually get bit by bit over a period of a year a business off the ground, and I did that right up to the pandemic. And on March 11th was the last day, 2020, and we're just going to be reopening. My school is called Lindy By the Sea because I'm half a mile from the ocean here. So Lindy Hop is the swing dance I teach, and it's the old name of the original American swing dance, Lindy Hop. And so the school's called Lindy by the Sea. And then I used to hold a weekly swing dance, which we're still not opening yet because of the indoor mask mandate here in Los Angeles.
Is that Rusty's Rhythm Club?
That's the name, Rusty's Rhythm Club, which everybody just calls Rusty's, which I think is really cute. Because when I have to tell people, hey, tonight at Rusty's, we've got, I got used to thinking of my name as a place. And so it's been really lovely to do that business for so many years, because I started in 1998. So it went straight through. And it's nice because swing dancing, like all dancing, it brings something so joyful to people. When you dance, you have that dopamine release and the endorphin release. And they know that music lives at a different part of the brain. So dancing, learning how to dance is the number one thing you can do to stave off dementia. Learning dance, not just dancing, but learning. And so it's really nice to do that on a regular basis, because you do feel very sharp when you come out of class. You just feel much, much more alert. I can see people, they come in, they're all glazed over. They can barely focus on their part. That's something as far away as their dance partner, which is like 2 feet, because it's further than their computer screen. But then by the end of class, you just feel the whole room change. It's really nice. So it's been great, because the way I teach dance, I think of it as building a community rather than just teaching people a step. So bringing joy to people. It's been a nice career.
Well, when I was taking your tap dance classes online, it wasn't just tap dance. You also had gatherings online where you look at old movie clips and discuss dancers and discuss what we were discussing earlier in this show. The taps were dubbed in later and the tapping sounds. So I got that impression that it's a big part of your life, not just a profession.
Right. And I like to pass on the legacy, tell the stories of those who came before, so people understand they're not just part of a little thing that's happening right now, that they're part of this legacy, and who are the people who came before them. That's fun. But the swing dance resurgence, interestingly, now has lasted longer. The resurgence has lasted longer than the original swing era, which always shocks people. They go, oh, because I explained to them, you're part of this resurgence. But this resurgence now is older. I mean, it's more years than, not older, but more years. With any art form, when you keep doing it, it evolves because there's people doing it, and people bring their own stamp to it. So that's always moving forward and changing. As a matter of fact, one of my really dear friends is Jean Velos, who's 97 right now, and she's a legendary swing dancer from the old movies out here in Hollywood. And she looks out at the dancers. She's God, they're so much better than we ever were. They are so much more musical than we ever were. And then we all look at her and go, you're crazy. You're the best they come. But I see what she means. Her point is taken. Like, dancers now do focus more, like tap dancers as well, focus a lot more on musicality and shading and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, than their forebears.
Well, here's a question I hope you can answer honestly. You enjoy dancing. You love dancing. But when you're in a show, it's a job, and the pressure's on. Do you get as much joy out of the actual performance as you do being a dancer?
Every dancer I've talked to has a different answer to that question. For me, I have never been able to decide which I enjoy more, rehearsing or performing. There's something so exciting about rehearsing, because it's not in that final state yet, and you're just getting it better and better and better and better. But there's something just it's delicious about doing a show in front of an audience, and you can just feel it. You can feel that audience. And when you do this show, because now it's locked, the material's locked, but you just get better and better, and there's this little, like, you come running off stage, that time I put my pinky in the air and I just could feel that was the right gesture. Like, it gets really minute, but it's what makes it greater and greater and greater. That's what, to me, was so intriguing about vaudeville. These vaudevillians would do the same. Let's say they had a 3-minute act. They did that 3-minute act for 10 years. And that's why it was so great. So I love both. I just love both. And I have often felt inside of me that I am most alive when I'm performing. I've talked to other performers, and they say, and it makes it hard to just be not on the stage, because you don't feel like you're fully alive. Of course, you really have to stay in this heightened state of focus, because you do want to make sure your taps are clear and clean and what's coming up next. So when you're doing a show and you're tapping a number, let's say it's for the number 42nd Street, take that. The whole number doesn't lay out in your head when you start. You're starting, you go, okay, there's this steps that go into this group of steps that go into this. So you're not thinking of individual taps, but you're thinking of those next phrases. As my jazz teacher calls it, you have to think of your gazintas. What does this go into? Yeah. The gazinta. And it's true. It's like while you're doing this, you're thinking, okay, now I'm going to move stage right as I turn, and this. So it's all it's probably the most heightened state of focus and awareness that I am in my life as a human being.
Let me ask you if you've ever danced or specifically tap danced in a movie.
Interestingly, for your listeners, perhaps, is the fact that I've never been interested in being in movies or that medium or television, because it's so boring, because you have to wait for so long to be called to do your little bit, and you're freezing cold by that time, sitting on a damp, cold soundstage. By the time they call you up to do your thing, you got to get yourself all revved up, and then they film, and then you go sit down again for another 2 hours while they change it. It's just not something. After doing stage, I wasn't interested in that. Now, Fred Astaire was just the opposite, because he had performed on stage his whole life, starting when he was 5, and when he came to Hollywood in like 1933, I think it was, he never wanted to go back to stage work. He loved doing film. He found that fascinating.
Well, it's interesting you bring up Fred Astaire now.
Yeah.
This far into the episode, but is he considered a top-notch tap dancer?
Well, he would be in my book. Yes. Not in my book, because he was already passed away. But I just think he's terrific. But he was revolutionary at his time, because he brought all these other dance forms into his dancing. So he was not just a tap dancer, but he brought in ballet and jazz movement. So he created this perfect blending of what became his style of dancing, unique to him. But he sure lay it down. No question about that. Clean, clear, crisp. Great time, great syncopation.
Did his own tap dubbing?
Yes, I do know that for sure.
Well, and he's one of Tom Lehrer's heroes.
Oh, yeah.
But Tom never wanted to meet him. Some people don't want to meet their heroes because they're afraid that the illusion will be shattered.
Right. And I did get to meet him. I went to Fred Astaire's house when I was a teenager, when I was 16, and I knocked on his door. And and he was so nice. He actually did come to the door after somebody else answered, but then he did come to the door just for a moment, and was just gracious, kind, just wonderful. So, but everything I've read about him, he had a quirky sense of humor. He was more of an introvert, very shy around people, and which is common with entertainers. Yeah. Like they're totally introvert extroverts are totally comfortable being on stage in front of 10,000 people, but then in a group setting they just and I'm in that group too, introvert extrovert. But yeah, I just can't believe I got to meet him.
Get an autograph?
I did, on my tap shoe.
You came prepared.
I actually brought it back to his house later. I was not prepared, because it was on a whim. One of my childhood best friends, she and I were driving along on Sunset Boulevard, and there was somebody selling maps to movie stars' homes, so we pulled over and got it and said, let's go to Fred Astaire's house, as teenagers do. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Well, you were lucky that was a legitimate, up-to-date map.
Yeah. And if we have a second, I'd love to just say one more thing about meeting Fred Astaire, is that when people ask me what I remember about that, because it was such a short meeting, he was walking through to meet, he had relatives in the other room, so he happened to be walking down the hallway that led to that little area where they were. And so when he opened the door, what I remembered was that he did wear that tie that he always wore, a necktie as his belt. And I noticed that. But the thing that, and I've spoken about this now, I didn't speak about it for years, that he had this energy that came off him that I thought was going to knock me down. And he was standing there so quietly. And so I had never felt anything like it in my life, but it absolutely flew off and it felt like it was going to push me back. And I never spoke about it because it was so woo-woo, you know. And then years later, we cut to when I was touring with the Glenn Miller Orchestra. It was the actually Glenn Miller's younger brother, Herb Miller. So it was the Herb Miller Orchestra. And we were at a dining stop, so we were all in our little groups. And I happened to overhear one of the musicians say, I worked with Fred Astaire once, and I've never felt it before, and I've never felt it since. And I was like, what? And he said, but he had this energy field coming off of him. I ran over to this guy and I said, oh my God, I've never said it out loud to anybody ever, but I had the same exact experience. And he said, absolutely. And he described it specifically and precisely the same way I did. So there was something. It's weird because I can still feel what it felt like.
And do you have a scientific or reality-based explanation? Is it?
It's because he's Fred Astaire. Yeah, I mean, I've met so many of the greats, and although they were fantastic, delightful, wonderful people, I never felt that physical thing again. I've never felt it again from anybody, so woo-woo. But it would be interesting to see what caused that, why I would feel that, and why this guy, an English musician, this guy was probably in his 70s at that point when I overheard him talking about it. But he spent a lot of time in England when he and his sister were probably in their late teens and early 20s. They performed in England. That's where they really made it big. They were an overnight sensation in England after performing since they were 5 and 6 years old. They're slogging through show business, through vaudeville and all that. They got on Broadway, but they were still not a hit. And they went to England in a show, and the English, Noel Coward came backstage in America and he said, you guys got to come over here. He didn't say you guys, I'm sure. But he said, you two would be so popular over in England, you must come over. And so they did end up going over there with a show and were really overnight sensations there, and went back several times with other shows and spent quite a few years there.
So as we wrap up, tell me anything else that comes to mind about your world, the world of dance, the world of Hollywood showbiz.
Well, I don't know if this will answer that question specifically, but something I would like to say is that my whole life I was always concerned with what I would be, what direction I would go, because I was a environmentalist and a human rights activist and a dancer. And I always thought, which one is it going to be? Because I was very involved in both worlds. And finally, what happened was I became this, what you would think of as a dance teacher, dance producer, but what it really came out to being was that I was still doing what I wanted to do, which was make the world a better place, and that was through dance. So if it's something that people need to think about for themselves about what to do with their lives, if you just keep following that magnet that is you, I guess, and head in that direction, you can do what you want to be doing. So I wanted to make the world a better place, bring humanity and kindness, and I'm able to do that through the dancing, though I'm still involved in the things that need to be involved with. The nice thing is that I'm very content with what I've done dancing-wise, and some of the things I've done are not in my future because they just require a different kind of stamina than that youth has. But I'm very happy, and it's nice to know I don't have to prove anything anymore. A lot of my contemporaries, we talk about that, oh, isn't it nice to watch those kids beating their feet on the floor, and we don't have to do that anymore. Like wreck your feet and break your bones and all that. Yeah, no, it's just nice. So there is that's nice to be content with that I had a nice career and that I don't have to prove anything anymore. Lucky me.
Well, I hope your luck continues, and next time I talk to you, there'll be a whole other topic to talk about.
Well, one of the things I really like doing is interviewing people, and there's a lot of dancers here in LA I'd like to interview. I did one, Pete Menefee, who was one of the chimney sweeps in Mary Poppins, and became a very famous costume designer. So I would love to, there's so many more of his generation of dancers who are now in their early 80s. I would like to do some more interviews. So I'm hoping to do some of those. I enjoy hearing people's stories.
And then what would you do with those interviews?
For me, I just want to preserve, again, their legacy. So I don't know if there is a what would I do with them, except put them on YouTube. But it is certainly a really neat idea for a series. But I don't have that whole vision. I would just like to collect the interviews while they're still have the memory of what they did and when they did it, with whom they did it. Yeah.
Well, I hope that my listeners will look up Lindy by the Sea.
I have a website, rustyfrank.com. That's a good portal to get to my information.
I have to ask if Rusty is a nickname or your given name.
It is a nickname, and I chose it myself. It was Harpo Marx's name in the movie Go West. I was a big Marx Brothers fan when I was the same time that I went to Fred Astaire's house. I was a big Marx Brothers fan. I liked Harpo the best and loved the Marx Brothers, and there you go.
Well, did you ever have any encounters with any of the Marx Brothers?
I met Groucho, I think, 3 times.
Only 3?
Yeah. Well, you grow up in L.A., you tend to bump into people. But we went to his house on Halloween, and we were, of course, dressed as the Marx Brothers. So he came out and greeted us.
Oh.
Isn't that nice? And then I was in a show about the Marx Brothers. It was the first show I was in, called Minnie's Boys.
Yes.
And he came to see it. And he came backstage and greeted us. But that was something, man. Standing on that stage, there was one scene where I was just standing during a scene. And I just saw him in that front row thinking, oh my gosh, I've been a fan of the Marx Brothers for so many years. And I've been watching their movies, and now there he is watching us. It was kind of mind-blowing for my 16-year-old brain.
Well, Rusty, thank you so much for taking the afternoon to talk with me and show me your town and reminisce and talk about the future and all that.
This has been very nice, Andy. It's so good to see you again after a million years.
Well, you've been in my treasure trove since, I first met you 45 years ago, but now you're a little shinier, and I'm getting to get another impression of your treasurosity.
Treasurosity, yes. Well, thank you.
I'm happy to report that Lindy by the Sea and Rusty's Rhythm Club have indeed reopened, and Rusty is teaching in-person tap and Lindy Hop classes again. It was a real treat to see Rusty after 46 years and to get reacquainted with her. She's a lovely, smart, fun person, and I'm very grateful to her for sharing her story here with you and me. Check the program notes for this episode on andystreasuretrove.com to see a picture I took of Rusty tap dancing with Tom Lehrer and her other students in 1976, plus a photo of Rusty and me in front of her house last year when I recorded this interview. You will also find links to more information about most of the people Rusty mentioned in this episode. Check out everything Rusty is doing at rustyfrank.com, and consider buying her book about tap, which has a foreword by Gregory Hines. Even if you're not interested in tap dancing, I know you'll be fascinated and enlightened by the stories inside. Now here's the part of the show I hate, at the very end, when I beg you to share a link to this episode or a link to andystreasuretrove.com with your friends on social media. Andy's Treasure Trove is on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and most other places where people get their podcasts. I'm proud to report that this show is listened to by people in 70 countries around the world so far. Hope we can do even better than that, I know it. Would you please click a few buttons to help me grow my listenership? I appreciate it very much. Thanks for listening, and see you next time. All rights reserved, Andy Moore.